On this channel, we've already talked about the muscle cars that doubled. The ones worth $500,000. The ones worth $3 million. And if you've been watching, you might be thinking, I missed it. The window is closed. There's nothing left at a price I can actually reach. You'd be wrong. Right now, in 2026, there are 5 American muscle cars sitting at prices that serious Mopar and GM collectors believe represent one of the last real buying opportunities in the entire classic car market. Not because they're second-rate, not because they're obscure, but because the collector market has been slow to recognize what these cars actually are, and that lag is almost over. Hagerty's research team, Classic.com's auction data, and multiple expert analysts agree. These 5 cars are underpriced relative to their rarity, their performance, and what comparable cars have already done at auction. Today, I'm going to show you all 5. We'll go through current prices, production numbers, and the specific reason each one is poised to move. And at the very end, I'm going to tell you exactly how to approach buying one in today's market, including the one warning that applies to all 5. Let's start with number 5, and this one might surprise you. (1968–70) Dodge Charger, Non-Hemi. The bullet car nobody can afford to ignore. The 1968 through 1970 Dodge Charger, second generation. Now, I know what you're thinking. The Charger isn't undervalued. Everyone knows the Charger. The Charger is everywhere. Bullet, the Dukes of Hazzard, the Fast and Furious franchise, every muscle car list ever published. But here's the thing. Knowing about a car and pricing it correctly are two different things. And right now, the data says the second-generation Charger is priced below where it should be. Hagerty's 2026 Bull Market List, their annual report of cars most likely to appreciate in the coming year, specifically called out the second-generation Charger as a buy opportunity. Their reasoning was direct. Values for good-condition Chargers have actually dipped in recent years from post-pandemic highs, and the younger collector demographic, people in their 30s and 40s, are now starting to move into this market in force. With dipping values for good-condition Chargers in recent years, it's a solid buy right now for those seeking a slice of all-American muscle. That's Hagerty's language, not mine. The current average auction price across all second-generation Charger variants, 440, 383, even base models, sits around $77,000. A good-condition 440 RT without the Hemi option can be found in the $60,000 to $90,000 range, depending on documentation and color. That's meaningful money. But it's also a fraction of what documented Hemi versions command. A 1971 Charger RT Hemi sold for $550,000 at Mecum-Kissimmee 2023. Here's the gap the market hasn't fully processed yet. The 440-powered Charger is nearly as fast on the street, uses the same body, carries the same cultural history, and costs roughly 1/5 to 1/8 the price of a Hemi car. That ratio has narrowed significantly for every other muscle car from this era. The Charger gap is among the widest left in the market. Whether you grew up rewinding the Bullet chase sequence, hearing the Dukes of Hazzard's horn, or watching the Toretto family's indomitable supercharged example in the Fast and Furious franchise, you've probably got a soft spot for the Charger's shape and sound. And that cross-generational appeal is exactly what drives long-term collector demand. The window here is the demographic shift. As Gen X collectors, who grew up with the Dukes of Hazzard, reach their peak earning years, and millennial collectors who grew up with Fast and Furious move into serious collecting, the demand pressure on non-Hemi Chargers is going to build. Hagerty sees it coming. The data supports it. And right now, you can still buy a real, documented 440 Charger for under $90,000. 1971 Plymouth Road Runner, the most overlooked Mopar. The 1971 Plymouth Road Runner. When people talk about road runners, they almost always talk about the 1968 and 1969 models. The cars that launched the nameplate. The cars with the cartoon bird and the beep-beep horn. The ones that appeared on posters and magazine covers during the Golden Age. The 1971 Road Runner gets almost no attention by comparison, and that's exactly why it belongs on this list. The 71 Road Runner is actually extremely undervalued, with an average auction sale price right around $70,000. Even the Hemi-equipped cars are cheap, considering their rarity, with an average of about $370,000. Let me put that Hemi number in context. The 1971 Hemi Road Runner was built in extremely limited numbers. Only 55 examples received the 426 Street Hemi for the entire model year. 55 cars. That's rarer than many cars that have been trading for over $1 million for years. Any other one of 55 classic Mopar would be $1 million ride. The 440 plus 6 cars are also shamefully underappreciated, with fully restored versions regularly selling for under $100,000. The reason for the disconnect is simple. The 1971 Road Runner suffers from what I'd call the year bias problem. Collectors instinctively value earlier years more than later ones, even when the later cars are objectively rarer. The 1968 Road Runner gets the emotional premium. The 1971 gets overlooked. But the market is already correcting. A 71 Road Runner Hemi sold for $500,000 recently, and all prices have been on a steady rise. When the entry-level version of a 55-unit production run is selling for $500,000, the gap between that and a comparable car's typical market price is a signal that the market hasn't fully caught up yet. For collectors who can't reach Hemi prices, the 4406-pack Road Runner is the play. A fully restored 440 plus 6 version for under $100,000, on a platform that just saw its Hemi sibling hit $500,000, is one of the clearest value gaps in the entire muscle car market right now. (1971) Pontiac GTO Judge. The last Judge nobody's taken seriously yet. We covered the 1969 Judge in video 2 on this channel, and if you watched that video, you know that the 1969 version has already had its moment. $1.1 million for the right convertible. 6-figure averages for documented hardtops. But the 1971 Judge, the final year of the Judge package, is a completely different story. With an average auction price of $130,000, the 71 Judge seems like it's in a good place. But we need to remember how truly rare they are and why they are seriously undervalued. A 1 of 17 convertible sold for $440,000 a couple of years ago, but that should be a $1 million car. Let me put those numbers in context. In 1971, Pontiac built only 357 Judge convertibles for the entire model year. Only 357 were produced in 1971, yet it often sells for less than a common 1966 hardtop because the early model bias distorts perceived value. Classic.com's recent sales data shows 1971 Judge hardtops selling in the $88,000 to $110,000 range, with a bring-a-trailer example with 16,000 original miles selling for $110,000 in October 2024. These are real, recent transactions on real cars. Here's the argument that collectors are making about 1971 in particular. By that model year, the Judge package was in its final year of production. Emissions regulations had already begun softening the engine specs, and buyers knew the era was ending. The cars that came out of 1971 weren't throwaway models, they were the last ones. And the market historically rewards last-of-an-era examples once nostalgia has had enough time to work. The 1971 Pontiac GTO Judge is due for a market correction as collectors realize what a steal this car is. GTO is easily the most recognizable classic-era muscle car nameplate, and the '71 Judge isn't just the baddest Pontiac, but one of the greatest in the GM stable. Putting $100,000 or so into a '71 Judge is likely to double or triple in the next several years. That's not my analysis. That's Hot Cars, citing Hagerty valuation data published in November 2025. And I happen to agree with it. We're halfway through the list. 3 cars down, 2 to go. And I want you to stay with me, because the next 2 cars are, in my opinion, the most compelling buying opportunities on this entire list. Not the most expensive, not the most famous, but the ones where the gap between current price and what comparable cars are actually worth is the widest. Car number 2 is one that Hagerty's valuation tool has specifically flagged as having the highest growth rate among all cars in its category. And car number 1 is the one I'd personally put my own money into first. Let's get into it. (1969–70) Dodge Coronet R/T, the Charger's forgotten brother. The 1969 and 1970 Dodge Coronet R/T. If you've been watching this channel from the start, you might remember we covered the Coronet Super B in video 4, the budget Mopar that nobody remembered until it started selling for $80,000. The Coronet RT is a completely different car, positioned above the Super B in the Dodge lineup, and it has its own compelling case. The RT, which stood for Road and Track, was Dodge's premium performance Coronet. Standard equipment was the 440 Magnum V8. The 426 Hemi was available by special order. And unlike the Super B's rubber floor mats and Spartan interior, the RT came with bucket seats, nicer trim, and the visual package to match. Dual scoops, RT stripes, and rally wheels. The Coronet has long been an afterthought for Mopar collectors as they go for more popular cars like the Dodge Charger and Plymouth Road Runner. But it's starting to get the recognition it deserves as prices are going up. We picked the tire-smoking 1968 Coronet R/T Coupe with the 425 horsepower Hemi because it has the highest growth rate according to the Hagerty valuation tool. But almost every 1968 to 1970 Coronet is a solid investment. That phrase, highest growth rate according to the Hagerty valuation tool, is the most important sentence in this section. Hagerty doesn't hand out that designation casually. Their valuation tool tracks auction results, private sales, and insurance data across thousands of transactions. When they identify a specific model and variant as having the highest growth rate in its category, that's based on real market movement, not opinion. The reason the Coronet R/T is moving? The same reason every undervalued Mopar on this list is moving. Collector attention is radiating outward from the most expensive cars toward their immediate neighbors. When Hemi Charger prices hit $500,000, buyers who can't reach that level start looking at what else Dodge built with the same engine in the same era. The Coronet RT is the answer. Same B-body platform as the Charger. Same engine options, including the Hemi. Significantly lower prices for now. The window on this one feels shorter than the others on this list. The Hagerty growth rate data was published in early 2026. When that kind of data becomes widely known, the buying opportunity compresses quickly. (1970) Buick GS 455. Stage 1. The fastest GM muscle car you've never seriously considered. I know what some of you are thinking. A Buick? On a list of undervalued muscle cars that will explode in value. Stay with me, because this is the one I'd put my own money into first, and here's why. In 1970, when GM lifted its displacement ban on mid-size cars, every division went to the 454 or its equivalent. Buick went to 455 cubic inches, and their Stage 1 package was, by independent testing, the fastest production car General Motors made that year. Not the Chevelle LS6, not the Corvette. According to Hemmings Motor News, the 1970 Buick GS 455 Stage 1 ran the quarter mile in 13.38 seconds. The 1970 Buick GS 455 Stage 1 is the fastest GM muscle car of the Golden Age with, according to Hemmings, a 13.38-second quarter-mile time. For context, the LS6 Chevelle, which we covered in Video 6, and which just sold for $770,000, typically ran 13.44 seconds in contemporary testing. The Buick Stage 1 was faster, by a margin that matters on the drag strip. The Stage 1 package produced 360 horsepower officially, another case of deliberate underrating. Independent testing showed actual output closer to 400 horsepower. And that 510 pound-feet of torque figure gave it a low-end punch that overwhelmed its rivals. We covered the GSX, the full Stage 1 package with the visual options, in Video 1 of this series. The GSX is now a $150,000 to $236,000 car. But the standard GS 455 Stage 1, without the GSX visual package, is a completely different price tier. A good condition Stage 1 coupe can still be found in the $60,000 to $90,000 range. Same engine, same performance, same Stage 1 mechanical package. Different price point, because collectors have been slower to recognize the value in the non-GSX cars. That gap is closing. The GSX's record sale at $236,500 in January 2025 put a spotlight on the entire Buick Stage 1 family. Collectors who can't reach GSX prices are starting to look at the standard GS 455 Stage 1 as the next logical step. And when that attention arrives in force, the price gap between the two will narrow significantly. The Buick brand bias, the old stigma that Buick was for grandparents, not muscle car enthusiasts, has been fading steadily for years. The generation that held those biases is aging out of the collector market. The generation replacing them doesn't have them. They see a 13.38-second muscle car with a factory warranty and legitimate production documentation, and they see value. My personal take: the 1970 GS 455 Stage 1 coupe in the $60,000 to $80,000 range is the single best value proposition in the entire muscle car market right now. That window won't be open in 2030. How to actually buy these cars. The one warning that applies to all five. Before I wrap up, I want to give you the one piece of practical advice that applies to all five of these cars, because it's the thing that separates a smart purchase from an expensive mistake. Documentation is everything. More than condition, more than color, more than mileage. For every car on this list, the difference between a car with verifiable factory documentation, original broadcast sheet, fender tag, window sticker, numbers matching drivetrain, and a car without it is not 10 or 20%. It's often 50 to 100% of the price. And for Hemi or Stage 1 cars specifically, it's the difference between a legitimate collectible and a tribute car that will never appreciate the same way. For the Charger and Coronet, use the National Mopar Club's online VIN decoder. For Pontiac cars, the Pontiac Oakland Club International maintains registries and resources that are worth more than any price guide when evaluating a specific car. For the Buick Stage 1, the Buick Performance Group and Stage 1 Registry are the accepted verification resources. Don't skip this step. I've seen buyers spend $80,000 on a car that turned out to be a clone, a lesser model converted to look like the premium version. Those cars exist for all five models on this list because the value gap creates the financial incentive to build them. Buy from known sellers. Get an independent inspection. Verify the documentation. And if you find a clean, verified example of any of these 5 cars at a fair price in 2026, you're in a better position than almost anyone who was trying to buy these same cars 5 years ago. The window is still open, but it won't be open forever. 5 cars, 5 buying opportunities, and in my opinion, a limited window before the market figures out what these cars are really worth. I want to hear from you. Which of these 5 would you put your money into first? And is there a muscle car you think belongs on this list that I didn't include? Drop it in the comments. The best answers from our viewers regularly shape upcoming videos on this channel, and honestly, some of the most interesting car discoveries I've made in the last year have come from people in these comments who know something specific about a car I hadn't fully considered. If you're new here, we break down the real history and auction data behind American muscle cars every single week. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss next week's video, where we're going to look at something completely different. Instead of cars that are going up in value, I'm going to show you 5 muscle cars that have actually lost value in recent years, and the very specific reason why, which most people get completely wrong. See you next week.